Okay, so in our last video we put the main beam on, we put the two stub axles on, we obviously put the axle pin in, etc. But I wasn't really thinking clearly when I did that, because what I've ended up doing is putting this axle beam upside down. This fatter part basically should be underneath, and the dome should be on the top. I'll show you in a minute what I mean. So what I'm going to do quickly is, sadly, I'm going to have to take the stub axles off, remove a pin, turn the stub axle, the main beam over, and put the pin back in. So I'm going to do that quickly, and yeah, I'll obviously speed up the video for this part, but we need to do that before we can go any further. Okay, so there we go. That's now got the two stub axles on as well. The axle's quite far forward. I just want to try and pull it back a little bit because it is just touching inside this frame. Now, just before we carry on, let's just talk a little bit about this adjustment. So hopefully you know that the wheelbase on both the back and the front can be adjusted, and obviously that's why you've got these multiple holes in the stub axle. On the back wheels, the way in which you do it is you've got various combinations between the whether the wheel is running with the dome or the shell facing outward or domed outward. You can turn them around, which also means swapping the wheels so that the tread stays true or is running the correct way, and that then gives you, obviously pushes the back wheels out. You've also got options around how the dome connects to the outer rim. They've got lugs on the outer rim, and you can put the dome on the inside or the outside of those lugs, and then obviously, you know, whether you turn the wheel the right way or what's considered the right way with the dome facing outward or facing inward, that gives you further adjustments that you can make in terms of the wheelbase. And based on how you set up the rear wheels then determines how you set up the front as well. And as you can see, you've got I don't think that one would actually work, but you've certainly got sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 settings, I think maybe 5, that you can do on the front, depending on how you set up the back. Now, the reason for wanting, for example, a very wide wheelbase might be if you're operating on very sort of hilly ground, where you're needing to traverse almost sideways or at the diagonal. Then you might want a very wide wheelbase, and of course you then adjust these accordingly. Obviously, for a very narrow wheelbase, you're talking about, or that's where you're operating within crops, and you need to set your wheelbase according to the width, essentially, of your rows. And you've got a few adjustments in between as well, obviously, but just worth noting that. Now, I actually went and checked which holes these bolts were in previously and how this was set previously. So I'm not changing it, I'm not adjusting it, I'm leaving it just as it is. And what you'll find when we put the front wheels on eventually is you'll find that the outside of the front wheel should run in line with the outside of the back wheel as well. I believe that's how it is. I don't think they're centered. I think it's the outside of the wheel, of the two wheels, that lines up. But Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that quickly. Right, now the next job is to put the radius arms on, and that will set the distance or the position of this axle in terms of the backward forward attitude. You've got a fair amount of movement on that axle pin, a lot of play in there, and that's primarily because as the axle moves backwards and forwards, up and down like this, and with the radius rods connected, it actually needs to move slightly backwards and forwards on that pin. And that's one of the reasons why you want this pin to be lubricated all the time, so that axle can move freely. It's not a lot, it's maybe a millimeter or two that it needs to move, but nevertheless that needs to be free to do so. And so look, let's move on. We'll take you up to the workbench now, and I'll just show you what we're going to do next in terms of the foot pegs and the mountings for that, which is where the radius rod joins the tractor at the back. So obviously we've been doing some cleaning, and these are the brackets that hold the radius rods up near the foot pedals. These are the foot pedals obviously, and the radius rod goes inside there. We've also cleaned up, this is the brake ratchet that goes on the right hand side when you're sitting on the seat, and this side is the plate that the clutch pedal comes down. It basically is the stop for the clutch pedal. That's on the left hand side. We've got obviously I've got some new nuts because the nuts that are on there were quite weathered and pitted, so we've got some new nuts, new spring washers. For the radius rods themselves, where they join the axle, we're going to use the Anglo kit A68786, which is the front radius rod bolt kit. You've seen that before. Now, on these plates are going onto essentially an alloy housing, which is essentially the gearbox housing. Now, we haven't talked much about oh goodness, what do you call it? The corrosion that occurs between dissimilar metals. There's plenty on the internet if you want to sort of read up on it, but essentially what we need is some kind of coating on the back here, because this is steel and the gearbox is alloy. Now what I'm going to use, I'm just going to use this Loctite 5922 that we previously purchased to put and to form a new gasket around that broken stud that we had to remove at the front of the engine. I'm going to use that again. You can also you can make a little paper gasket, that would work as well. Basically you can use anything that is going to stay put, essentially. I'm choosing to use the Loctite because it's what they call non-hardening, so it doesn't harden up and form a permanent bond, but it will create a separation between these two metals and prevent them from corroding and oxidizing, essentially. I don't know if it's oxidization or if it's just corrosion, but they're sort of the same thing. But anyway, so that's what we're going to do. There was something else I wanted to tell you. Obviously to get this off I had to take the clutch pedal off again, so we will set up the clutch, or we need to set up the clutch again, which, whether we get a chance to do that in this video, whether we do it in another video, I'm not sure. I might do it as a completely separate video for people who specifically want to see how to set up the clutch, which will be better for the channel than having it embedded in another video. But anyway, bottom line is these have all been cleaned up. These were heavily corroded, lots of pitting inside there. Unfortunately the pitting's still there, but at least they're smooth, and we'll get a good helping of grease in there. And again, another point of maintenance on your tractor is, from time to time, basically just to remove your foot pedal, pop the radius rod out and just clean that socket out and give it a good greasing before putting it back. I mean, I don't know what the service schedule, even if the service schedule even mentions it, but once a year would be sufficient, I think, possibly once every other year even. Just from time to time, clean that up, take it or clean it up, and put some fresh grease in there. It's not going to hurt anything, and it's really not a difficult job to do. Okay, anyway, let's get on and get these radius rods on. Okay, so now look, we talked a little bit about the galvanic action or reaction that happens between dissimilar metals, just briefly there, but again, just to say, this is an alloy, right? So it's it's not pure metal. It's some kind of alloy that's for the gearbox. Whereas this bracket which goes on here and sits against that's steel, that's metal. So we need to put something in between. Now I'm just going to use this Loctite MR5922. It's a non-hardening gasket material, but I'm going to use this. I've got it, and I think that it will do a good job. So we'll just quickly pop some of that on. You don't need it, like I say, you don't need a huge amount. It doesn't have to be particularly thick. It's going to get squashed out anyway, so you just want to make sure that you cover everywhere, so that you don't have any opportunity for that for those two metals to touch, essentially. I think you can see that. Yep. Right, so that's going to go on there. Now you'll note that I've had to take the clutch pedal off in order to get this off. So we'll put that back on in a second. Oh, okay, it's going to be a little bit difficult. Let's just close this up before I mess it everywhere. Now you'll see that I've put some grease in the cup, and that obviously is where the radius rod pivots inside. So we don't need anything between these two because they are similar metals, so there's no need to put anything between those. But that goes on there. Now we'll pop the clutch pedal on. We're not going to set it, we're not going to tighten it or anything like that. We're just going to have it resting there like that. And that's because when the radius rod comes in, it's going to be the pedal needs to be behind it. So you'll struggle to get that in with the radius rod in place if you forget. So do remember to put that in there. Now what we can do is pop one nut on at the back here, just to hold all of that in place. I should probably use a ratchet, but there we go. I'm not going to tighten it just yet. It's just nipped up. Okay, so that's it. Now obviously we do the same to the other side. As you saw up on the bench, on the other side you've got this plate is basically the ratchet for the handbrake, or what amounts to the handbrake, for holding the foot pedal down. Now, right, we can now move on and bring the radius rod in. Okay, so I've got the radius rod here. Now this is the one that has been damaged a little bit. Somebody's been pounding on that for some unknown reason, but we're going to reuse it. For me, it's kind of, well, first of all, these are not readily available. I think you can get them, but they're not easy to get hold of. But for me, it's part of the history of the tractor, right? So we're going to pop that in just like that. Okay, now before we go any further, I wanted to mention I've already put the radius rod on the other side, and the reason why I'm showing you this side, is that when you put the second one on, which in this case is this one, there's one extra step, or there's one thing you have to note, which is basically the position of the axle, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the forward-backward position. Now, so what I'll show you, basically, I'm going to put the front bolt in, and then what we'll see is that knuckle probably won't line up at the back, that ball joint, and that's because we need to move the the axle backwards or forwards in order to get it to line up. It's the radius rods that determine where that axle is, where the axle beam is sitting on that axle pin in terms of backward forward attitude. So yeah, look, let's get the front in. Now what I'm going to do, and what I like to do, is put a bit of grease on the shank of this bolt. It's not because this turns and not because you need lubrication in there, but it does help obviously when it comes time to take it out for any reason. If it's been greased, it's less likely to have corroded and gotten itself stuck. So I'll just quickly pop some grease on that. You don't need a heck of a lot. It doesn't really matter, but basically just make sure that you've got it spread. I've probably got way too much there, but let's put some back. And as we push the bolt in, we're going to just twist it as well to help spread the grease. Now there is a flat washer that should go on first, which I probably should have put on beforehand. So now we've got all the grease on top of the washer, but anyway, we'll just transfer that back. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Alright, so we're going to line this up with a hole in the axle, and then we can pop that in and turning it as we go, get that grease nicely spread. Right, and then I'll just put this nut on loosely for now, just to hold it in place, and we'll move here to the back. So as you can see, let me just turn the camera a little bit. There we go. So as you can see, that knuckle is not quite joining up. You see it's further forward than it needs to be. So what we need to do is push the axle backwards a bit. Oh, probably too much, but anyway. Well, I can show you now. Now you can see it's too far, right? So what we want to do is pull that axle forward again. Maybe not quite as much. Come back until it slots in just like that. And if you just hold it gently on the, put some pressure on the radius rod, it basically just pops in. And I'll bring the camera over in a minute and you can see how the front has aligned itself now. Now again, a little bit of grease inside the cup. And you just want to do that so again, so this knuckle stays nicely lubricated. Every now and again, as I say, just come in, pop these foot pegs off, clean up the joint, put a bit of grease on, and pop them back on. It's not a big job, and it will save you lots and lots of strife further down the line. So we put our nuts back on, and we can then tighten everything up. Really easy, simple job, nothing complicated, just a couple of things to note, but I'm sure most of you can work it out as you go. So, okay, now this one's thread's a little bit tricky, but we'll get that on first. There we go. Okay. And then we can just tighten all of these up. Don't need to go mental with them, they just need to be nice and firm. And there we go. That's it. So there you can see now how the axle has essentially moved back. We've got a good clearance here, which we didn't have when I first put it on, and that's why it was catching earlier. But what's interesting is you notice that the distance between here is they're almost equal. It's a little bit further forward than it is back. But what I wanted to hopefully demonstrate on the camera is as the axle is moving, do you see how this is moving backwards and forwards as well? And that's what you're looking for. That's what you're trying to achieve when, in terms of keeping this axle pin nicely lubricated and free, essentially. And that's why I think it's really important to make sure that you're maintaining that pin on a regular basis so that it can stay nice and free like that. So the final job now really is just to tighten up this radius rod bolt, which I'm just going to do quickly. Okay. And there we go. That is the front axle pretty much complete. Now obviously the jobs that we've got left to do is basically all with the steering. And to get those steering rods in, there's no point putting those on until we've sorted out the steering box, which is basically the next, let's call it, chapter in our journey. But obviously you can see those are now nice and free. Our axle is lovely and smooth. We've got a lovely action there, nothing to worry about there. You saw how the axle is free to move backwards and forwards. It's a really good result. I'm really pleased with how this has turned out, and I'm hoping that this tractor is going to be really sweet in terms of the steering and the trueness of the steering once we're complete. The steering was definitely very horrid when we got this tractor. It was very difficult to steer. The steering box is definitely part of the problem. We can feel, even now without the arms connected, you can feel the steering is not great, and we'll show you that in the next video. But nevertheless, look, our spindles weren't too bad, to be fair. You remember when we took them apart, there was a little bit of scoring on the bushes, and again I'm glad that we've sorted that out and that these will now hopefully be good for a good couple of years. The hubs are lovely and free. Well, that one's not. Yeah, there we go. You know, it's a little bit stiff because obviously we've put a little bit of tension on those. We'll get, when the wheel is on, we'll get it properly set up for that. But you know, the hubs we've gone through them as you know, and and now the axle pin is sorted out as well. So yeah, once again, I'm really happy with how that's turned out, and we can now move on to the steering box. So yeah, once again, thank you everybody for watching. Thanks for joining us, and hope that you all got something out of it. More importantly, I hope you all have a fantastic week ahead, and we'll see you on the next video. So cheers for now.